One. Hello and welcome to the DMPL Podcast. I'm Aaron Gurnis, your host, and today on our podcast we have Fall Author Series author Austin Frerick. Austin, how are you doing today?
Pretty good yourself.
I'm doing good. It's a nice day. We're recording, this podcast coming out in September. We're recording a little bit before then, and it's kind of in the middle of that heat wave here in Iowa where
Yeah.
yesterday was, well, I missed the state fair, thankfully, but it was, I think, 107 yesterday, heat index or something like that. Going to be, Sunday was pretty miserable too. So we're hoping that it's, cross our fingers, the last little bit of this before fall comes in. So
It's
I guess,
classic Iowa late August weather.
yeah, right. And this is kind of the perfect time to talk to you as Barron's. I have a printout because this book is flying off the shelf like hotcakes here at the library right now. But Barron's, Money, Power, and the Corruption of America's Food Industry, and it's harvest season right now. So it's kind of a perfect time to talk about food, especially food in Iowa. And Austin has a quite he has a lot of really good takes about, as again, money, power, and corruption in the American food industry. And I guess first, Austin, I want to talk about approaching this book. I mean, you've been in, I think, someone that's been in the antitrust or monopoly power policy scene for a while. What, and you're from Iowa, so what made you kind of go this route, though, when you were thinking about writing a book? How did this book come to be, basically?
Yeah, how this book came to be is kind of funny. I'm not even kidding when I say this. This whole thing started at a conversation at Carl's place in Des Moines.
all
It's like that
good
famous-
things do, right?
It does. Like, by the way, I didn't even realize at the time how legendary Carl's was. A buddy just invited me there for a beer. And this was in 2018. This was that big governor's race in Iowa between Fred Hubbell and Kim Reynolds. And we were shooting just talking over bush lights. And he was telling me how this one hog farmer, Jeff Hansen, had donated over $300,000 to Kim Reynolds' campaign, which, to be honest with you, I didn't know Iowa doesn't have campaign contribution limits. So, first of all, that's fascinating. But then what really blew my mind was he was telling me that, Jeff has a home out by Jordan Creek, and he also has a home down in Naples, Florida, and he has a private jet that he flies back and forth to with the words allegedly when pigs fly written on it. So in my head is like, that's incredible copy. But second, to me, it was also a symbol of what happened to Iowa in my lifetime. And like, I've driven 151 all the time growing up. It's that highway that connects Cedar Rapids to Madison, partly because, we go to the Dells every summer for vacation, but also we have connections to Dubuque, and I went to grad school at Madison. And just driving that in my lifetime is, you used to see animals all the time, and now you don't. You smell them, but you don't see them. So this whole thing started just me grappling with, how did Jeff Hansen become one of the most powerful political figures in Iowa? And so it was kind of that question led me to do this book. And so each of these barons, to me, the barons are really narrative devices to tell bigger structural stories. So like Cargill's my grain baron, but that chapter is really about the Farm Bill, like what's happened to the American Farm Bill. So I don't want this to be like a Lifestyle of the Rich and Famous book. I really want you to understand, take away is like how this happened, how we got to this point where, one man does 5 million hogs a year, or, one dairy couple does 30, are part of a 35,000 cow dairy operation, 35,000 cow dairy.
Monopoly power, antitrust power, talking about that, it gets into the policy weeds, and it's something that, people write papers about with big graphs and a lot of footnotes, and it can be something that kind of gets a little, people get lost in the weeds of it a lot of times when they're, it's hard to make approachable sometimes, I think. And I think this book does a really good job of taking those different specific policy points, as you said, and kind of breaking it down into these segments, these barons. You talked about the hog barons. It's grain barons, coffee barons, dairy barons, berry barons, slaughter barons, grocery barons. And we're talking about companies that people around Iowa definitely know. Iowa Select Farms is a hog farmer. Cargill, a lot of Iowans know Cargill. There's Cargill everywhere. Driscoll's, as you talk about, anytime you go to buy berries at a grocery store, you're either probably buying Driscoll's or whatever the store brand is, which is probably packaged by Driscoll's, who knows. And then Walmart, obviously, everyone knows Walmart in Iowa. And if you're connected to ag, even more of those. So was it difficult to kind of translate those stories down? Like, how did you go about choosing these barons and deciding that this was the right way to approach those specific policy points and to tell this story?
Yeah, so honestly, to get to this point, I mean, this book took me 5 years. I mean, it really started after that conversation in Carl's place, but really it's a combination of time in a team. I didn't realize writing a book how much of it is a team sport. Just having a really good editor. It's kind of like a crock pot where like the best writing comes from a slow churn. You write a paragraph, you write a page, and you take some time away from it, and you just edit the heck out of it. I mean, I was telling my mother-in-law yesterday, the biggest fights my husband and I have gotten into these last few years were over his red line edits. He's vicious with a pen, and it'd take me like 3 days to tell him he's right. But I mean, this book's only 200 pages.
Yeah. It's like a 7.5 hour audiobook, I think.
It is, and like, but there's 70 pages of footnotes. But if you're gonna write a book like this, you cross your T's and dot your I's.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's just, I really wanted to distill. I really wanted to communicate this stuff in a clear way, because I just think so much of this era, like language, is designed to keep people out, and like it's almost anti-democratic that way. So I really wanted to like, how do you explain the Farm Bill in a really accessible way? And then also, I should say, like, how I picked the barons. I mean, part of it was, you know, going back to what I said earlier about different concepts. I really thought about the concepts first. Like, you know, Farm Bill I have to have as a second chapter because I really want to build on that concept. And then my third chapter is about antitrust. So I kind of did that. And then what I did is I found compelling narratives to kind of wrap around them. So like Jeff and Deb Hansen, they're not the largest hog farmers in America. That's actually a Chinese-owned company called WH Group. They own Smithfield. Jeff and Deb are about the fourth largest, but I just felt like they were the best narrative to tell the story of what happened to Iowa in my lifetime. I also wanted to, you know, change, like, I didn't want to tell the same story over and over. So like, like, I kind of view Jeff and Deb as like trashy new Florida money, whereas like my second Baron Cargill is like much more aristocratic, Connecticut, waspy, and like, you know, they're almost this like omnipresent force that we don't really know. So that's why kind of, as I laid out the book, I wanted to change different type of narrative structures, which I have no formal training in like.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. I mean, you were probably writing academic papers for so long. Yes. So to try to translate this into a really clean storytelling structure is a whole different ballgame.
It is. I mean, I think part of, you know, I used to write like in the National Tax Journal, so it's like a very different writing. But I think, I mean, part of it is I'm a first generation college student, and so I'm pretty good at code switching and like making language really simple. That's like a big priority item of mine. But I mean, it was a challenge. That's why this book took me 5 years. I mean, it took me about 3 years to really lock in this kind of narrative structure and a lot of edits. Like the chapter that's the hardest to write was coffee, and that one almost got lost on the floor, cut on the floor. Sorry. But like that's a lot of writers or like literary types love that chapter. Like it's Eric Schlosser's favorite chapter, he told me. But like for me personally, it's like it was a nightmare to write because it's not linear. I talk about Panera Bread, I talk about my like the Nazis, and then I talk about my mom's bakery in Cedar Rapids. Like it's all over the place from a linear perspective, and it just took a lot of distillation and like honestly, my editor and I going back and forth. Like that was probably a 2-year effort to get that chapter into a really tight 5,000 words.
Why was it important to keep it in there then? I mean, if you almost lost it and could have maybe added something else, why in the end did you and your editor and your team decide that this had to be in there?
A few things. I just think antitrust is everything right now. I think there's just been massive consolidation in the American economy, and I really wanted to tell people how we got here. And the other two parts to that are, one, I also want to show what we've lost, and I want to use that telling my mom's bakery. There's kind of this cult of efficiency right now of we try to do policy via Excel sheet, and like there's no coffee native to Iowa. You can get coffee anywhere. Like I wanted to show people came to my mom's coffee store because that personal relationship she had with them, the pride she had in her business, and how so much of that has been lost in this era. And that you just need a personal story there. And then finally, is I really wanted to make this bigger point that monopolists finance fascists. And I just think that's history, that historical point's been lost in time. Like I didn't know this until I started researching, but like a big part of America's post-World War II reconstruction in Europe and Japan were breaking up the monopolists that finance the fascists.
Huh. So the food industry in general, I think, is really in a fascinating point in American culture right now. So I'll take part of this as my story. I grew up on a dairy farm in southeastern Minnesota that my dad and my brother still operate. It would be, gosh, I think my brother would be fourth or fifth generation operating it. Definitely fourth, maybe fifth. And so I'm still one generation removed from that. You know, I grew up touching the food industry every day, and it's part of that dairy operation. But I think as I look around, you know, I went to Drake University, and you know, there's not a ton of rural kids there, and so you start talking to people about how they see the food industry, and that I think as more and more kids grow, it's kind of like a spiraling circle. More and more kids grow up away from agriculture because more farms close or more farms go bankrupt, and then there's less people that have that connection, and then it's kind of like more and more you don't understand what even is going on there. So how do you see the food industry and its place in how Americans perceive it right now, in terms of like writing this book, and then how you even describe what's wrong with the food industry?
Yeah, so let me first start by saying I can tell you have that slight kind of Wisconsin accent.
Yeah, I grew up right across from La Crosse, and it's definitely more. I've also lost a little bit of that northern vowel shift that I still have, but also you're talking about code switching. I mean, you go around, get into the feed store there, and then all of a sudden my vowels start dropping a little bit too. You know, I get that little rural accent too. So yeah.
Oh, I know. I joke. My husband and I talk about this all the time because he's from out east. Iowans don't really have an accent. We have interesting word choices, and the two he always makes fun of me for are my family calls the couch a Davenport.
Oh yeah, that's a very Iowa thing, I feel like.
That, and like the other one, and it's a very old Iowa thing, is to say visit. Like, I'm gonna go visit with my brother.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to go down that little, but I just find that language to me is so fascinating.
Oh yeah,
But
yeah.
to your point, I mean, a big point of my book is it's not just about those who grow food; it's about those who work it, harvest it, process it, transport it, cook it, serve it. People like my mom. And once you start talking about the food system like that, you're talking about like 1 in 10 of Americans that do this kind of work. To your point on just like what's happening in like the dairy industry is, I think lost dairy. You know what's funny? Dairy is probably the most complicated industry. I mean, you know this. It took me. My favorite joke is only 4 people understand the federal milk order program, and 3 of them are dead.
That probably makes sense. I was trying to talk to my dad about milk prices one time, and he's like, "Well, you can't really count class 3 or class 4 because this, that." I'm like, and then like you start getting into Canada and stuff like that, and it's like, oh my gosh, like it's red tape on red tape on red tape, and it's also like a lot of agriculture and industry where volume over price, where like you just have to pump out, and I think that's something you can probably talk a little bit more about, but people don't kind of underestimate about food industry in general. It's volume over price, which means all small producers have to just kind of keep pumping out, and that's why they have to take the prices they get in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean that's 2 things to that. Is just for your listeners. What do you say? Class 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
Just understand. So that's just a really good example in the food system of just how antiquated these systems are. Like that system was designed before refrigeration. So basically, it's like cheeses in one, butters in one category, and fresh milk is in the other, and it's based really on like longevity and transportation. And you're like, this really doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Massive refrigeration on top, because also there's this whole dynamic too of like, you know, dairy production used to really historically ramp up in the spring, and now it's you know what I mean? It's just not that kind of dynamic anymore. Mm-hmm. But you know, we're still trying to use these like antiquated 1920 systems for like that's just not the food system. I mean, that is me one of my big takeaways too is we just need to update things. But you're right on the volume thing. Is you see that both in dairy, but just the farm bill in general is it's designed to overproduce a few things at the expense of everything else. So like tons of subsidies go into corn because it's all about making cheap feed for industrial, you know, meat and dairy, and then for dumb things like ethanol. But if you grow carrots, you don't get anything. So it's really pushing people to overproduce a few key things. It's why like highly processed food is cheaper than fresh produce at the start, because we made a choice as a society to highly subsidize that. And
well, you can explain why that choice was made. I know you talk about it in the book, so kind of let listeners know a little bit about what goes into a choice like that. Why, you know, 50 years ago there are more apple orchards than there are now, that sort of thing.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying, having me step back.
Yeah.
So let me go back to the original Farm Bill, where it comes from. You know, the New Deal Farm Bill is really rooted in I call it Goldilocks. Like it comes out of the Dust Bowl where, the land farmers were overproducing, markets were glutted, and, they were engaged in really destructive environmental practices, worsening the crisis because they're trying to save their land. They're just trying to squeeze a little bit more out.
And honestly, probably didn't know all the science either. Like they didn't know they're destroying their land by
Yep,
planting corn every year or something like that.
exactly. And then so what happens with Iowa and Henry Wallace comes along and creates this framework where sure you get subsidies, but then you have to engage in conservation practices that are tied together, and a lot of that involved taking land out of production. So you're trying to find that sweet spot of not overproducing but producing just enough for the economy and for your personal livelihood. Which, by the way, that's kind of what the Canada dairy system is. They try to they call it supply management. I try to avoid that word. I just kind of think of Goldilocks. But so Cargill is my grain baron. And Cargill actually starts in Iowa, up near where my family's from, in Northeast Iowa, kind of near Decorah. And their whole thing is moving grains. And they did not like this. They thought FDR was just, a commie, yada, yada, yada. Because what this did is it limits grain production. They want to move as much corn and soy as possible. So they fought it. By the way, turns out the New Deal, like this New Deal farm bill, was actually incredibly profitable for them, but that's, a different story. So, because their whole thing is, they call it the endless belt strategy. So I had to read their 1,500-page personal commissioned history to get, to understand all this. But I kind of think of them almost as Standard Oil. They own the middle. They're not consumer facing. So like, even like personally, I grew up around Cargill. I played soccer next to a Cargill. I was born next to a Cargill plant. Went to church next to a Cargill plant, but I never really knew what they were. Cargill now moves 1 and 3 and 4 grains globally. So what happened was, since the New Deal Farm Bill, the company systematically attacked the Farm Bill. They wanted to essentially remove these controls, this kind of Goldilocks framework, and overproduce. And they really focused on that 1996 Farm Bill, what I call the Wall Street Farm Bill, where it really just went off the rails. Where, I think crop insurance is the best example of just the corruption and just how bad things are, where when most people hear this, they think of like, oh, it's insurance for a rainy day. It's not. It's insurance for low prices, where 60% of the premium is paid for by the taxpayer. So, it's, and to me, a really good example too of how bad that is. There used to be limits on how much subsidy you could get. That's gone. So like, unbeknownst to most people, Bill Gates owns some of the most farmland in America. So he can get as much heavily subsidized insurance, low price insurance to grow corn as he wants. And so that's why you have this system. Like, that's why you get ethanol. Like there's anyone that thinks ethanol is good for the climate in 2024 thinks the world is flat. At best, we're taking the best farmland in the world and just wasting it, burning it in our cars. But it crowds out other stuff, especially in Southern Iowa. Southern Iowa used to be cattle country, and it really crowded out that. It really pushed those kind of family farms off the land and put it into corn. Because all this system does is we kept creating artificial uses for surpluses. Well, instead of growing more corn, we just grow carrots, we grow rye, we grow, you know what I mean? Like other things. And take the dairy industry. I mean, part of it I wanted to show how this is all interconnected is it really pushes farmers to put their dairy cows into industrial animal facilities. On top of it, dairy's really shifted to the West for the last 40 years. So you have 3 times more dairies done in New Mexico now than Vermont, which, you don't really think of dairy cows in New Mexico, but no. That's where we are. And then what's really wild too with the climate crisis is that's kind of collapsing out west because of, cows are so thirsty and like the aquifers just can't sustain it. So you're kind of,
well, they have to be fed, and what else takes a lot of water? Grain, corn, all that stuff.
Yep. And so like transportation costs, like all this stuff, it's all interconnected. So that's kind of like why so much of the book is I wanted to build on concepts and then tie them together later on as you read.
Okay, devil's advocate question for you though. I know some people argue that we overproduce, but in a lot of ways that's good because it keeps the food, like it keeps cheap food out there for people. It means that there are, we're kind of back trying to keep the lean years from ever happening. And that's kind of what America's meant to feed the world in that sort of sense. When you hear that argument, I guess, what is your thoughts on that, on how overproduction means we never suffer for a famine or anything like that?
I can't take anyone serious that says feed the world when they believe in ethanol. I'm sorry. Like you are contributing to higher grocery store prices and food prices by growing ethanol. That's just a fact because you're not growing food. Number 2, That's just not factually true. I mean, Farm Bureau loves to say this makes cheap food. Dollar for dollar, Americans, and this is 2021 data from USDA, Americans spend more at the grocery store than like people in Germany, United Kingdom, Canada, and we're about dollar for dollar even in Italy. And trust me, a dollar of food in Italy is very different than here. But we shouldn't be shocked by that. I mean, I think the food industry is the most concentrated space in America, and concentrated markets gouge. It's what they do. And I mean, you see it at the store now. I mean, I saw a bag of Lay's chips for $6, and you're like, come on, it's just a fried potato. And like, there's a glut in the potato market right now where like Hy-Vee had a sack of potatoes the other day for 99 cents. Like, don't tell me frying that 99 cents of potato is $6.
When you talk about concentration, what is kind of a layman's term definition of concentration in terms of like how many competitors in a space? And then I guess, do you have any good examples of an industry that might not be concentrated so people can kind of compare it to, your concentrated industries out there?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm glad you asked that question because it's such a simple question, but can actually get so complex so fast. Even when we talk about concentration in America, we tend to use national figures. And like, that doesn't matter in like the milk market. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to take milk from Wisconsin and like, sell fluid milk down in like Bakersfield. So a lot of this stuff is regional. So even we talk about food is like really applying that kind of regional concentration lens. Institutional economists will say once four firms kind of control, numbers kind of vary around 60, 70%. It's alarming to say the least.
Which really doesn't take much in the end. Like
No.
there's a lot when you think about that, that's a lot of industries in America.
Well, I mean, just this is such a simple thing. And I realized this a few years ago. I was sitting in on a Yale Business School class, and the goal of any corporate executive is monopoly. I mean, that's where profits are. I mean, the free market competition is ruthless. It's hard. You know what I mean? Every day you're fighting to make a better product, better service, all that. Your goal is to get to like a concentrated space where you can just get a little cream off the top and you don't have to compete as much. And so you have an inherent tension between government wanting competitive markets. So farmers get a fair price. You pay a fair price. Workers can earn a decent wage. Business not. And I just think we're living in another laissez-faire era where things just went off the rails. I mean, we just need like another Teddy Roosevelt style moment. I mean, that's what weirdly gives me hope here is we know what to do. We're not talking AI, we're talking hogs.
Yeah. Well, yeah, talk about that a little bit. I mean, some people, when you have farms, just number of farms shrinking, the size of farms growing, how do you get the toothpaste back into the tube with this? How do you develop more small farms? How do you encourage, outside of just like, regulation and policy, how do you actually encourage more small farms to start up and how to kind of bring that local source back? I mean, that includes policy, so talk about that too. But I think there's also almost a recruiting effort that probably has to be done in some sense.
Yeah. I mean, my another current in my book is What is a Farmer?
Yeah.
All my barons cosplay as farmers, but like take my dairy baron. I mean, if you claim residency at the Ritz-Carlton, Puerto Rico, are you really a farmer? Even though you claim to be one on dirty jobs? Or is it the undocumented men that run your empire that are the real farmers here? Just where we go from here, I mean, what gives me hope is ethanol's going to die. I mean, that's just the fact. Cars are moving to hybrids and electric vehicles. And so what are we going to do with all that farmland? My big thing is I just want to put animals back on the land. Shoving animals into a metal shed, it just concentrates the pollution. It's awful for the animals. It also makes a bad tasting product. And I think that's been underappreciated in this era. Inputs really matter in meat and dairy production, especially dairy. A cow in pasture just makes such a better tasting milk than a cow shoved into a metal shed in the desert. So, and also like, let's keep in mind, I think underappreciated too has been the growth of robotics in the agriculture. Like a lot of grain production, corn and soy will be robotics. And that's not a bad thing. That's actually pretty cool. But there's only so many cows on pasture that one person could look after. And so, I mean, even going back to my Jeff and Deb Hansen, I mean, they employ like 7,000 people. What used to be like an independent family farm who'd pay taxes locally, send their kids to local schools, are now low-wage workers for an empire. And instead of having that relationship with an animal, that sense of pride, their job now is essentially haul out the dead pig bodies from these metal sheds. And so it's like, this isn't radical. I mean, my big point here too is the system we have now is radical. A lot of what we're talking about is very traditional. It is radical that one man owns 5,000 hogs or does 5 million hogs a year, sorry.
So do you think it's an education effort to almost just help people realize what certain parts of the industry look like right now? Because I do wonder if people even, know what's going on in terms of like one person owning 5,000. They hear big, but they don't understand what that means versus what used to be, I guess.
I'm hesitant to say education as like most people are just working 9 to 5. You're busy trying
Yeah.
to raise the kids. I think the story here is our public officials that failed us. There's a certain former governor of Iowa. You can kind of see an undercurrent in my book who I'm not a fan of. I compare Secretary Vilsack to Harold Hill of The Music Man. He'll tell you everything you want to hear, but his word means nothing. The fact is, these last 4 years, the meat markets have gotten more concentrated, and this is one of the most bipartisan space for reform in America. So we just have a lot of public servants just not doing their job. I mean, and a lot of it is basic rules not being enforced. Like, for example, Iowa has a law in the books called a packer ban. It says that you cannot own the animal you slaughter. If you enforce that rule, you break up Smithfield. Like, Smithfield owns 1 in 4 hogs in America, and it's Chinese owned. So, there's a certain politician in Iowa who loves to talk about China, 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 but she's the attorney general and doesn't love to enforce that rule. So it's like kind of, you know what I mean? Like, there's just a lot of basic things that, like, you have public officials looking the other way where, I mean, the second you regulate hog manure like human manure, this model is no longer economically viable.
All right, so you're coming to the Des Moines Public Library on the 25th of September, which is, I believe, a Thursday. Is that right? Or is that a Wednesday? I mean, I think it's a Wednesday, actually. 25th of September. I'm looking this up right now. It is a Wednesday. Yes, September 25th. Wednesday, September 25th. You're coming to the Central Library for the Fall Author Series. I know we talked a lot about your book today, but kind of give us a lowdown when you go to these author talks. What do you talk about with the people?
Oh, I love this. I mean, this is like my favorite. It's funny. Some writers don't like this process. This is a weird thing to say. I don't like writing. I love writing is from an intellectual perspective of, to me, it's you have to understand how someone amassed power in order to kind of fix it.
Yeah.
But I love, like, I mean, the fun part of this book is just talking to people and people telling me, oh, you should know this. You should look here. This is how your words meant to me. And I mean, my favorite book event I've done by far was in Iowa Falls back in the spring, which was the hometown of my Jeff and Deb Hansen. And I did it with Julie Dunn. Julie Dunn is the woman I opened my book with. She's a retired secretary from Eldora, Iowa, and she spent her retirement, fighting the hog barons because she's seen what's happened to her community, and she doesn't want her grandkids to grow up in this kind of world where, I mean, the water in Iowa is basically an open sewer at this point. 60 to 70% of the waterways in Iowa are just too polluted for you to go into. So I did that event with her, and we had 50 people show up at this event. And first of all, you're lucky if you're an author in New York City to get 50 people in an event. So in a small town, Iowa, to get 50 people is a big deal. But like more than half rooms just stayed after to talk with me, because just to tell me little things. I mean, they saw this empire building in front of in their lifetime, and they seen what it's done to their community. I mean, Iowa Falls is a beautiful little town, but you can tell it's seen better days. And so I love that. I don't know. It's just like it humanizes this stuff because I can look at Excel sheets all day and read academic papers, but you're just missing something. Like, honestly, my favorite people to talk to writing this book were either people that work in the industry. Like, I love talking to grocery store people, but I also love grocery store people. It's like, I love a Hy-Vee manager because, like, people don't realize how much thought goes into a grocery store. At the same time, too, I love, like, journalists, old time journalists. Like, in my dairy chapter, you can see the influence of Pete Harding. He's the editor and owner of the Milkweed. It's a dairy publication, all over that chapter. Because, I mean, these people, this is their livelihood. They know these industries in and out. And it's just, I could pick their brains all day. Because every market's different. Driscoll, I mean, berries are so different than dairy. And then even regions of America, like, I have such an Iowa-centric mind. California is just a different food system. Like, they never had the family farm heritage we did because of the way land was appropriated. I mean, it's always been kind of colonial. Like, and I noticed that driving California, they don't have farms among their land. You know what I mean? The owners of the farmland live in Beverly Hills, whereas like Iowa, we had this magical family farm moment. And it's like my big focus is how to get back to that. How do we restore the middle class in the farm system and, kind of take the temperature down a little bit?
Yeah, so Of course, Austin Frerick will be here Wednesday, September 25th. You can find Barron's, a real copy, not just a print paper printout of a cover, because they're all checked out here at the library. But at the library, guess what? I'm going to tell our listeners a secret. The audiobook is available, always available right now on Libby. So if you want to listen to the audiobook, check it out. It's one of those always available audiobooks right now. Of course, you can buy a copy at local bookstores as well, and you can get on hold on the wait list here at the library. Great book, highly recommended for everyone. Austin, thank you so much for talking with us today. Thank you for the conversation. Real informative. I mean, there's so much we didn't touch on that hopefully you can touch on too when you come on the 25th. Like, for example, you're just bringing up about Iowa Falls and small towns, and your book goes into really how rural communities have been impacted by the degradation of the food system too. Just another great topic to pick up the book and read. So thanks so much for being here today, and enjoy talking with you. I can't wait to see you on the 25th.
Yeah, thanks again for having me on.